we have nearly 6,000 Greek manuscripts and thousands more in those other languages. For corruption to be possible, some mythical monk somewhere would have had to track down every single manuscript in every language across multiple continents, change them all without a trace, and then sneak them back undetected. He would have to live for hundreds of years to accomplish this, since these early texts were being copied and circulated around the Roman Empire for a long time. It would be like me finding every copy of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings that exist on Earth, stealing them all, changing the content in in the many languages that these books were written in, and then returning every copy without ever being caught. It's absurd, it's impossible, and it didn't happen. Welcome back to Campfire Apologetics, where I help equip the everyday Christian with tools to help defend our faith in a hostile culture. I'm Mark Hudson, and today we're going to dig a little bit more into the topic and religion of Islam. And, it's something I've been digging into a little bit more lately. Again, it's a growing religion, and it's you're as a Christian, you're increasingly more likely to encounter it, and so I think it really is important that we have somewhat of an understanding of their worldview, what they believe, and how to be able to counter it and how to be able to share your faith with them. And so I think it's an important topic to cover. I've studied it a bit before, but this time I wanted to get a little bit more of a clearer grasp of its worldview and how it interacts with Christianity. And some things you remember and you're able to spout off the top of your head, and then other things you kind of have to relearn and go back to your notes. It's hard to absorb everything well enough to be able to recite everything on the spot. So I have notes, and I don't think that's a bad thing. I think everybody should have some kind of notes on these different worldviews and how to talk about them. But one of the main claims that Muslims make about Christianity is that our scriptures have been corrupted. Now, I want to say Muslims say there's quite a few things that they say about Christianity that are really not true. They're misunderstandings or misrepresentations of the Christian faith. For example, they think that we worship Mary as part of the Trinity. Now, if you're looking at Roman Catholicism, you might say, well, they do worship Mary, but that's not what I'm talking about. They actually think that Mary is part of the Trinity and that we actually worship three gods. They think that we're polytheists and not monotheists, meaning that we worship multiple gods and not one. And there's other things as well, but that's just an example. So, and I had to put off doing this episode, for a little bit, until I recently had a conversation with an atheist who made similar claims. Not so much the you worship Mary stuff, but the your scriptures have been corrupted argument. And so I was gonna kind of put it off for a little bit because I've talked about it a little bit in the past, and I figured, well, it's not pressing. I don't really have to get to that right away, which I still don't really, but it's just something that came back to mind when I was having this conversation. And I decided that I wanted to do this episode sooner than later, because that's something you hear a lot from Muslims or atheists or others, is that your scriptures have been changed or corrupted. But the thing is that it's always an assertion. It's never actually an argument. There's never any evidence ever presented. It's more or less just this, well, everybody knows that. that's usually the argument, which isn't an argument at all. And no, not everybody knows that, because the actual historians that have studied these things don't seem to know that, because that just simply isn't the case. Um, Side note, kind of have something going on in my throat. So if you hear me clearing my throat a bunch, that's why. And sorry about that. It's probably annoying, but here we are. Can't do much about it. Um, but yeah, when they say everybody knows that, well, okay, well, who's everybody, right? Have they studied textual criticism? Where do they study that? Have they looked into the transmission of the biblical canon? Usually it's just a slogan passed around in their echo chambers. And it's a claim that has no evidence behind it. And I think it should just be dismissed at that point. If they can't back up their assertion, then again, it's not an argument, and you can just move on. Like, okay, well, what's your evidence for it? Have you studied textual criticism? Where have you studied textual criticism? To what degree have you studied it? Where did you hear that? Why would you believe that? Or, how did you come to that conclusion? These are all questions that you can ask. And those are things that you can, I've talked about it in the past, but a great book to get to kind of learn different techniques and questions to ask people is the book Tactics by Greg Kokel. Uh, Highly, highly recommend it. But, in reality, both Muslims and atheists and others often refuse to do any kind of historical research. And, I think it's because that research would force them to confront the facts that undermine their unbelief. And I believe that if some real, genuine research were truly done from anyone really making that kind of claim, then the claim would disappear altogether. Now, they may not become believers because they'll find other ways to suppress the truth, but I think if they were, if enough people were to study these things, I think those claims would go away altogether, because they're just not true. So let's look at Islam specifically. Muslims believe that the Torah, the Psalms, or the Zabur is what they call it. Now, also, there are terms in Islam that I might say that are probably going to be butchered. I'm probably not going to say them right, because I don't speak Arabic, and I'm not in that world, so I don't know the inflections and the accents and stuff. So forgive me there, but anyway, yeah, they believe that, or they believe in the Torah, the Psalms, or the Zabur, and the Gospel, which they call the Injil, and they believe that they were all revealed by Allah, but later corrupted. Now, when I hear this, I like to use what's called an internal critique. So you basically, what that is you're testing a worldview against its own claims. So if the worldview falls apart on its own claims, then it's pretty easy to say, well, then that worldview is incoherent and should be abandoned. Now, here's a simple question, or a starting question. You could say, would you trust a religion whose scriptures were corrupted? Now, almost no one would say yes to that, or no one knowingly follows a corrupted revelation, right? I mean, who who in their right mind would agree to that? They would say, yeah, of course, I would accept and believe and follow a religion with corrupted scriptures that were knowingly corrupted. Of course, no, nobody's going to say that. So you ask, would you accept a religion with corrupted scriptures? And again, they'll say no. So then we ask, did Allah reveal the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospel? The Quran itself answers for them. It says yes. So if they say no, then you can maybe jot these down and remember them for a later date. But for example, Surah 3:3, it says, He has revealed to you the book with truth, confirming what came before it, and he revealed the Torah and the gospel. Surah 5:44, it says, Indeed, we revealed the Torah, in which was guidance and light. Surah 5:46, and we sent Jesus, the son of Mary, confirming what came before him in the Torah, and we gave him the gospel in which was guidance and light. And there's several more, but the point is clear. According to the Quran, Allah revealed the Torah, the Psalms, and the gospel. So I'm not going to give you every single example that exists for that, but if you're curious enough, you can look them up yourself if you wanted to really remember all of them. But so then the next question you could go to would be, what happened to those scriptures? So you believe that Allah revealed the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospels. Allah revealed them. They're that's supported by the Quran. And so what happened to those scriptures? Now, Muslims say that they've been corrupted. But if 3 out of the 4 of Allah's revelations were corrupted, why should we believe the Quran is any different? If Allah couldn't preserve the first 3, how can we trust him to preserve the 4th? Like if he, I think that's a fair question. If he didn't have the power to preserve the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospels, then why would we believe that he has the power to preserve the Quran? And another thing is, so the Quran itself says Allah's words cannot be changed. Surah 6, 115, it says, the word of your Lord has been perfected in truth and justice. None can change his words. Surah 18:27, recite what has been revealed to you from the book of your Lord. None can change his words. So which is it? Either Allah's words can't be changed, or the Torah, Psalms, and Gospel, his words, were changed. You can't have it both ways. And so you could see that the Quran contradicts itself. It says that Allah revealed the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospels, and that his words cannot be changed. But Muslims claim that the Torah, the Psalms, and the Gospels have been corrupted. So apparently his words can be changed. The Torah, the Psalm, and the Gospels, those are his words. So again, both cannot be true. This is the law of non-contradiction. Something cannot both be true and not true at the same time and in the same way. Some Muslims argue, well, we have the originals preserved in the Quran, but that still admits corruption. It still would say that corruption happened. So the problem still exists. You haven't done anything with the problem. All you've admitted is just saying, well, we have the originals, and what you have is corrupted, which means that Allah's words were still corrupted and changed. So if corrupted versions exist, then Allah's words were in fact still changed, which directly contradicts the Quran. Now, contrast this with the Bible. We have thousands of manuscripts, many dating back within decades of the originals. We have the Dead Sea Scrolls, Codex Sinaiticus, Codex Vaticanus, Codex Alexandrinus, and many more. All of them align with what the Bible says today. The Bible that we have today says the same thing as those manuscripts, and those manuscripts predate Islam. Now, these are all early complete versions of the Bible. There's thousands of other manuscripts and fragments of manuscripts and things like that. Now, again, these manuscripts, these predate Islam by centuries. And that means Muhammad in his contemporaries had access to the same scriptures that we have now. So when exactly were they supposedly corrupted? Was it before Muhammad or was it after? If it was before Muhammad, then Muhammad was affirming corrupted texts as guidance and light. If after, the thousands of earlier manuscripts still prove the charge false because the earlier manuscripts would still say something different than the supposed corrupted ones that came much later. So either way, the Muslim claim collapses. And think about the logistics of this. The New Testament alone was written on 3 continents in 3 languages by about 40 authors over 1500 years. Very early on, it was translated into Syriac, Coptic, and Latin. We have nearly 6,000 Greek manuscripts and thousands more in those other languages. For corruption to be possible, some mythical monk somewhere would have had to track down every single manuscript in every language across multiple continents, change them all without a trace, and then sneak them back undetected. He would have to live for hundreds of years to accomplish this, since these early texts were being copied and circulated around the Roman Empire for a long time. It would be like me finding every copy of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings that exist on Earth, stealing them all, changing the content in the many languages that these books were written in, and then returning every copy without ever being caught. It's absurd, it's impossible, and it didn't happen. And there's nothing to suggest that it did. Muslims also argue that there are many versions of the Bible, but this is misleading. When they say this, I think they're saying something different than what most people would think they mean, if that makes sense. Different translations don't mean different messages. So that's what they mean, is that you have all these different translations and they all say something different. They have different messages, but that's not the case. um, there's simply the different versions we have are simply the result of a free transmission and wide distribution. This is part of how God preserved his word, allowing so many Christians to copy the content and pass it along as they were persecuted. Now, thank God for all of these early Christians that did this. Ironically, it's the Quran that has multiple versions. Historical and textual evidence shows different canonical readings called Qirat, which, again, I'm probably saying that wrong, so forgive me. It's Qirat, I think. Now, each one of these was passed down by students, and it created up to 20 recognized transmissions, or close to 20 recognized transmissions, if not exactly that. Today, the most common are Hafs and Warsh and a few others. Now, these differences are not just pronunciation, they actually affect the meaning. For instance, Surah 2, 184, in the Hafs reading, it says, a ransom of feeding a poor person. In the Warsh, it says, a ransom of feeding poor people. Now, the plurality in the Warsh reading actually changes the legal ruling. And then in Surah 43:19, the Hafs says, the angels who are the servants of the most merciful. And then in the Warsh, it says, the angels who are with the most merciful. Now, these aren't just spelling quirks, they change interpretation. And that's just 2 examples. So the claim that the Quran is perfectly preserved letter for letter is simply false. Now, this shows that it was not an eternal book that Allah dropped out of the sky for his prophet to find. Um, Again, those are only 2 examples. I don't have all the time in the world to find every single different variant reading between just the Hafs and Warsh. I mean, like I said, there's more than just those 2. So there are many more variant readings. And again, that's one of those things that you can dig deeper into if you're interested in that sort of thing. But the point is that they exist, and the existence of those variant readings shows that Allah's words were not perfectly preserved the way that Muslims say that they were. In speaking of the externality of the Quran, let's step back and look at a bigger picture. Islam teaches that the Quran is eternal, right? So they believe that the Quran actually existed with Allah eternally. But for some reason, Allah waited thousands of years after Moses and 600 years after Christ to reveal it through an illiterate merchant in a cave. That's interesting. Why let billions of people live and die without his final revelation? Um, why allow the earlier scriptures to be corrupted first, leading millions to follow what Islam claims is false Christianity? Why deceive people into believing that Jesus was crucified, leading to the belief of his resurrection and further leading to millions of Christians? I said that weird. Christians. Further leading to millions of Christians who would later reject Islam. The contradictions just pile up. This even connects to other false religions. Take Mormonism, for example. An angel, Moroni, supposedly visited Joseph Smith alone and gave him a lost revelation. Islam's story is almost identical. An angel, Jibril, who they say is Gabriel, visits Muhammad alone with a lost revelation. Both claim the Bible was corrupted. Both elevate their new book above God's word. And Paul warned us about this very thing, this exact thing. This, I mean, it couldn't be any more, close to what actually happened with Mormonism and Islam. It couldn't be any more exact to what happened. Galatians 1:8 and 9. Even if we or an angel from heaven should preach a gospel contrary to the one we preach to you, let him be accursed. It's almost as if God, in his omniscience, knew that people would be deceived by supposed angels at some point in the future. And consider Muhammad's first encounter. Muslim sources like Sahih Bukhari and Ibn Ishaq record that Muhammad originally thought that he was demon possessed. He described being violently pressed by this being to the point of thinking he was going to die. He was so distraught that he contemplated throwing himself off a cliff to end his life. Each time he tried, the being reappeared to stop him. That is not the peace and clarity brought by God's angels in Scripture. Even Muhammad's wife tested the spirit by uncovering herself, reasoning that demons would flee from a woman's body. Uh, I mean, that's not how we test the spirits, but okay. That's not a biblical test. That's not how God says you should test the spirits. 1 John 4 tells us that the true test, whether the spirit the true test is, whether the spirit confesses Jesus Christ as having come in the flesh. What Muhammad experienced was not from God, it was demonic. So where does this leave us? Islam is internally inconsistent and historically indefensible. If its claims are true, they end up refuting themselves. In contrast, the Bible is preserved, it's historically reliable, and prophetically fulfilled. And it points us not to confusion, but to Christ, who really died, he really rose, and he really saves. Now, we could go on and on, but maybe at a later date, I'll touch on more things. And, if you're interested in the topic of Islam and just apologetic methods in reaching Muslims, then I highly, highly recommend Avery from God Logic. His channel is, I believe you just search God Logic on YouTube, but he's got endless content when it comes to debating Muslims in the street, on his live streams. He's got so much stuff. Dr. David Wood is great. Dr. James White is great. Look up any of these guys. Sam Shimon, he's got a lot of stuff. I mean, there's some really, really awesome guys out there dealing with Islam and dealing with other stuff too, but they're kind of mainly known for their apologetic against Islam, But we can see that Islam is wrought with problems and contradictions. It is internally inconsistent and can't stand on its own foundation. And because of this, we should disregard it as a plausible worldview that can successfully answer for what is called the preconditions of intelligibility. We can see that if Islam is true, it's false because of its self defeating nature and its own claims. The preconditions of intelligibility is something that I've referred to in the past, and it's something that is more popular in the presuppositional apologetic circles. But it's basically saying, that a worldview has to be able to account for things like logic and induction and uniformity of nature and ethics or morality. The preconditions are what must be true before anything else can take place or be true. What must be true before we can do logic or use logic or have morality. In logic it covers different laws being like the law of non-contradiction and the law of excluded middle and the law of identity and things like this. If we examine the laws of logic, we can see that Islam doesn't follow the laws of logic. It's self-contradictory. It breaks the law of non-contradiction, and so it can't account for these preconditions. So anyway, I think I've covered a good bit. I think I've given you guys something to kind of go over, maybe go back, take some notes on those different chapters, surahs, different things that I gave you to be able to hold in your back pocket for if and when you have a conversation with a Muslim. And I encourage you to do it because it's going to challenge you. A lot of them, well, I don't know, not a lot in my experience, but some of them have, somewhat of an understanding of the Bible, and they may bring up some things that might challenge you, makes you go back to the drawing board, and strengthens your faith and makes you stronger in the Word. So, you're only going to get good at these things if you practice them, if you, go out and share your faith. And now is the time to do it. I mean, it's always been the time to do it, but now we need to just be bold, get louder, preach the gospel unapologetically, without care in the world about who's going to think what about us. It doesn't matter. The only person that matters when it comes to what they think about us is God. It doesn't matter what your neighbor or your friend thinks. I've lost friends. Oh well. I mean, what can you do? Jesus says that would happen, and it does. So we shouldn't be surprised. But brothers and sisters, thanks for watching and listening. As always, go give a reason for the hope that is in you. Do it lovingly and with respect. All right. See you guys.